Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Ya la 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 la. Good evening, everyone. I hope that you're all doing well and are warm if you're in Austin, Texas, and hopefully you're content with hopefully warmth and electricity at this point. We're really, really glad to be able to present this really lovely series of book club and a special edition of this evening as we discuss the book by Isabel Wilkerson called Caste. The full title, of course, to get it up right here, The Origins of Our Discontent. And really just wanted to appreciate the creativity of some of the really wonderful community at Congregation Agudas Achim, CAA Adult Education, Brooke Hirsch-Thompson. And thank you so much, Brooke. I saw you on here a little bit earlier, as well as our dear friends at Chazak, Mariessa Anton, and a really great group of folks who are putting things together. It's a really lovely collaboration. So as we were discussing, this kind of grew out of our conversation as we honored Dr. King a few weeks ago. And there was a curiosity about this book, Caste, as many others as well. And as I was voluntold to put all this stuff together, which was really great, I was thinking, you know, I really wanted to have a conversation with people that explored the caste systems that Isabel Wilkerson put together, highlighting ideas about Indian culture and society. She talks a little bit about Nazi Germany, which I can talk about a little bit. And then, of course, the conversation about the caste system of America and the historic moorings of that, which I think are really food for thought and provocative. And the names that leaped to my mind to want to share this with are, of course, my dear friends, Pam Benson Owens, who I've known for a long time, and really honored that you would join us, as well as VG Panda, who I've also known for a long time. And it's really lovely to have us know each other and you know each other, and really important. So I really wanted to, perhaps we'll begin for just a little bit of a conversation for the three of us. And then, of course, if people have questions, you can submit them to Jennifer Rubin, our admin, who's doing great work, or you can put them in the chat and maybe we'll circle back as well. And then we'll have conversation after our sort of a presentation of, we can have a conversation among us. And it's really great to have so many friends who are here. And before we begin in just a moment, I just want to acknowledge our dear, dear friend, Simone Talma Flowers, who is in charge of Institute Interfaith Action of Central Texas, IACT, something that I've had the privilege to be a part of. And I know VG, you've volunteered there as well. So, and I know Pam, you've been associated as well. So it's really great to have our teacher and our dear friend, Simone, as part of this. Just a brief bio. By the way, I'll just let you know how old I am. I had done actually a lot of research for this, and it's on the computer at my synagogue, which no longer has power. So I'm just doing my thing. So that's what's going on. But I had sort of done a whole research thing. And Pam, I was going to talk about just the amazing work that you have done in Austin. And I just want to mention just a couple of things, because I think it's very, very important. I know that you're an Aggie, which I don't know if everybody knows that, but whoop, I guess that's pretty cool. And you've also got a master's at St. Edward's University, and you've done some I think your master's is in human services, concentrating on conflict resolution and mediation. You've done a lot of great work at the Austin Presbyterian Theological Seminary as well, which I've gotten to know you there also. You have run a variety of really great businesses in Austin, including Edge of Your Seat Consulting, and you are the executive director of Six Square, which is really important. And I know too that we sit together, you and I, on the board of directors for Leadership Austin, and I know how committed you are to communal and civic conversations and uplifting us with education, with a great way of connecting each other and just holding honest space with each other and not backing down from that. And I admire you and appreciate you very, very much, and really looking forward to connecting with you. VG, you are the director. I'm going to do this off the top of my head, I think, so please forgive me. The director of inclusion and diversity at Trinity School in the Episcopal School in Austin. And you have done some really amazing work too. You've got an MBA from St. Mary's University in San Antonio. And also really important work that you've done as a glue of really helping people bring us together in the journeys that we have in our identity, etc. So I really appreciate you being here, VG. We've done some great work at Trinity together. And I think the three of us, we're gonna have some really, really good conversations. So really welcome and appreciate everyone being here. I do wanna ask just a question or two before we begin, just about just our connection to this book, Caste, specifically. And Pam, I'm gonna ask you the question. You've told me when I asked you, invited you to participate, you said you've read Caste twice and you've listened to it once already. And I'm just gonna ask you a simple question, why? So that's a lot. I mean, I read it and I appreciated it and I enjoyed some and had questions about other things. It sounds, this is like a mission for you, and I'd love to hear why, what's going on. And if you want to introduce yourself some more, we'd love to have you, and welcome, welcome. So honored to have you here.
Thank you so much. Oh my gosh, I love being in this space. I've had just such a great time working with and getting to know Rabbi Neil. I've worked with VG at Trinity a while back. And so this is great. I see several familiar faces, and I'm always honored when people show up in brave space to have conversations that we might not be always conditioned and trained to have, as we've done this thing called life. I see my sister Robin on here. This is great. So yes, in addition to being a complete and total book nerd, because I am, the first time I read the book, I stood in complete and total shock. Not because I wasn't aware of a lot of the historical references that it outlined, but because it was kind of all in one place. And the correlations of all of this dehumanization was in one place. And so I made a commitment to do what I've been really trying to do for the last several years, which is to read from a place of responsiveness and to not be reactive. So the first read through was a blur, because I was like, wait, what did I just read? The second read through was, let me put on the different lenses for which she came to the book. There was extreme research. There was historical reference. There was an academic lens. It had some lived experience peppered in there. It had the lens of a Black female, woman of faith. Like, she literally must have been exhausted after this. I sat on a webinar with her a couple of months ago, and the extent for which she poured herself into this book to write it, I felt like deserved the respect of me reading it and putting myself in different lenses, right? Like, what would that be if I was in the Indian caste system? Let me read from that lens. Let me read from a lens of a person of faith. Let me read from the lens of a professor academically or a researcher. So I spent time doing that. The third time I had to listen to it, because that's where I've built my narrative around how do I leverage this information to build beloved community here in Austin. So the third was a listen to, because I needed to hear the weight of her voice describing this. So that's why I did it. And I'll probably read it again, because just like any movie, when you see it the second time, you miss stuff because of your lens. So I will probably read it again.
And let me just, since this isn't one question that we'd thought of until now, but we're improvising, you know, so let me ask you, just as a book nerd and a fellow book nerd, so I'm glad we're doing book club. It sounds like it's a match made in heaven. Was the audio different than the reading, or was it better, worse? Like, I'd love I'm curious about, many of us don't have time to sit and hold the book in our hands. So Any suggestions or thoughts about that?
The audio for me was freedom and liberation because I could connect to a lot of what she was saying. And it was a safe place for me to not be in code shifting, performance, within the parameters of what it means to be a citizen type mode. So for me, hearing another Black female who had command of so many cultures and history and lived experience and an excellent writer, and to be able to weave it together and go from talking about the caste system in India and the untouchables and her experience in the airport, for which I experience almost every time I travel. It was liberating for me to hear her see it. I hear her read it, and I felt very much seen when I did it that way. So for me, it was a very liberating experience to hear her speak the words from the book.
Thank you, Pam. We'll talk more about, we'll circle back to all those, that multivocality of the book and the ways that we can read it and the ways that we can understand it. Viji, it's just great to have you here, and I hope that you're enjoying a healthy family and joy, especially in this time. And you bring joy and such goodness to so many, not only in the Trinity community, but certainly in Austin as well. You know, I just wanted to ask you, you know, how does, obviously Wilkerson has portrayed the various caste systems and how they inform each other. Again, the Indian caste system, the caste system in Nazi Germany, and of course in America. How does the discussion about the Indian caste system resonate for you? Has this systemic ingrained discrimination that she mentions as a feature of the Indian caste system, has it been a feature in your life? And please, you can tell us a little bit about how you grew up and just, I would be curious just to know a little bit more about that, please.
Yeah, it's a great question. So in my role as a director of diversity inclusion, I can't do the work without really digging deep into my own personal experiences and unpacking messages I either heard explicitly or implicitly. And so this particular question took on a whole nother kind of dimension almost. But if you don't mind, I'd like to give a little bit of background about a little bit about my story, but also I want to just put this kind of out there for us to think about. I believe that the Indian caste system has kind of translated into within the Indians in America and has contributed for South Asians, has contributed to anti-Blackness in the United States. So that's kind of like a pretty powerful statement. And I've been making a lot of connections myself. And so I want to start with a little bit of just telling my story, and then kind of we can, see where that goes. But my family immigrated to the United States in the late 1960s. I think I was about 3 or 4 years old. Definitely started preschool here. My father was doing postdoctoral work at the University of Washington in Seattle, where there was a very international crowd. Okay. Then we moved to Rockland, County, New York, and we got our green cards in the early 70s. And I received my citizenship in the early 80s. In Rockland County, in the schools that I attended, I was the only Indian kid in my grade. So it's my brother and I were probably the only Indian kids in the whole entire school, and most of the time. I also need to tell you that I was very sheltered. My parents were very, very protective as a girl. I wasn't allowed to do after school activities such as like sports or Girl Scouts like my brother did, who was younger. So consequently, I observed a lot. I was very quiet and I just listened and, kind of soaked in things. So I think the first time that I knew that Black people were treated differently was when I was I think it's about 7 or 8. So I think I was in about 2nd grade. And my parents were looking for an apartment in a nicer neighborhood. And in those days, my mom used to wear a sari every single day, right? So when my parents decided on a particular apartment, my dad and I came back so he would sign the lease, and the super had told him that he's so glad that my mom, who wore the sari, had come with him because he wasn't going to rent us the apartment because he thought we were Black. And as a 7 or 8-year-old girl, I knew that that was like, I didn't even feel like thrilled that we're getting the apartment. It just didn't feel right. I didn't know what that meant or anything, but I knew it didn't feel right. And it felt worse when my dad told my mom about it. And it isn't what he said, it was more how he said it. And I remember having a more visceral reaction to that. And I didn't ask my dad, because in those days, like that wasn't, kids don't question their parents on those, on any of those kind of things. And thinking back, I also often wondered if I was scared to hear what had been left unsaid. I don't know. That's, you can always go back and think a lot of different things. So after I graduated from high school, we moved to Houston, where there was a large Indian population in general. So when I was living in New York, outside of the city, there weren't any Indian people. So now we're moving to Houston, large Indian population, and a large Telugu population specifically. So when I'm Telugu, which means that I'm from the state of Andhra Pradesh. Okay, so there was a large Telugu population. And this is, so from when I was 18 to 24 is when I received a whole bunch of messages about caste. Okay, we would have like dinner parties, and dinner parties are like, 30 people, 30 families, and they're large. Dinner parties would break out into caste politics. I mean, they would have fights about caste politics. And these are like subcategories of, I think in the book they talked about the four major castes. So these are like subcategories of like one of the castes, right? I mean, it was ridiculous. There were intercaste marriages, and I mean, those families fell apart. Like they wouldn't speak to each other. Like if two young people like my generation fell in love and they were a different caste, their parents didn't speak, right? And they were ostracized. And so by my early 20s, I got a lot of messages of who I should marry and who I shouldn't marry. Now, my parents, unlike many, were open to different castes. Okay, and even Indians outside the Telugu community. Now that's probably because they thought I was really tall, and they needed to kind of open it up to have more of more choices. But I don't know if when they're open to different castes, if that meant they were open to Dalits. Okay, which are untouchables. I don't know that. It just never, my parents said they were open, but I never questioned that was, so I don't know that specifically. So, when I did get married, I ended up marrying somebody from my same caste. And I think, Rabbi, before the session started, you asked about the connection, right, with Indians. It's a huge network. So like, family friends who know some other family friends said, oh, there's a match over here, and maybe you should, and then you exchange bio datas, and then you kind of talk, and then you see what happens. And, so I went through a lot of that for quite a while. And the person I ended up marrying, oh, I also must tell you, there are messages of colorism that also are talked about quite a bit. And colorism is associated with caste. Okay, so the fairer you are, the more beautiful you are. Okay, and so that is another sublayer to all this. And so when I did, when my husband and I got engaged, he was tall and he was fairer than I. He is the same caste as I. Everything. However, people are wondering, well, why is he marrying her? Right? Because if a gentleman is fair, they usually even marry someone who's more fair than they are. If a gentleman is dark, they marry someone who's more fair than they are. Right? So there's a whole lot of things underneath there. And so so everything that I heard about that, I thought was definitely that time period, right? Kind of like the 80s and 90s and, you know, whatever, but now we're so much more evolved, and, you know, things have changed, and, you know, we're in the modern, you know, like in India, I know for many years, it's been outlawed. The caste system is outlawed. However, it still exists, but I thought in the United States, for sure, it's, you know, it's got to be better, right? I mean, things have got to be better. So recently, my sister-in-law had told me about a caste discrimination case at Cisco in the Silicon Valley. And I was like, are you kidding me? That's a company in the United States. And there's caste discrimination. So I Googled it. And apparently the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing filed a suit against Cisco for caste discrimination perpetrated by 2 South Asian managers who were Brahmin against a Dalit. So in that article, it cited a whole study done by Equity Labs on caste in the United States. And it's not like 2 pages. I mean, it's ridiculous how much abuse and discrimination Indian to Indian is going on. So I go back to my original kind of statement that I put out there, is that the caste system is not relegated to India. I think it goes, wherever Indians go, that's the caste system goes with them, and it contributes. You know, I think that South Asians have balanced living under and aligning themselves with white supremacy while replicating caste and anti-Dalitness and anti-Blackness. So there's a lot there. And so I'm gonna just leave it at that point, because, you know, I think I said a lot, but, you know.
That is a lot, and I appreciate it. And I think something people should know is that your marriage was an arranged marriage. Is that correct?
That's correct. And it's an arranged marriage. It wasn't like when my parents, it was an arranged marriage with my parents, who their parents said, this is who you're going to marry, and you go get married. I was allowed to talk to my husband. It was, you know, we talked for about 2 months, then we got engaged, and then got married 3 weeks later. So in a period of 4 months, we got married. And we've been married for 32 years. So
I feel a song coming on from Fiddler on the Roof for some reason. But I'm feeling it. Wow, VG, that's a lot. And Pam, there's other questions that I think I can consider, but I'd like you to react to what VG suggested. I mean, it's pretty provocative of suggesting what she suggested about anti-Blackness, and anything that you want to surface about what she proposed and said.
I was going to go into something deep, but I first want you to ask her, did she kiss at her wedding?
All right, let's do it. VG, go.
Okay, so I shared this story earlier, is that yes, but you're not supposed to kiss at Indian weddings. Well, that was in 1988. But the priest was a little bit drunk, and he said, you may kiss the bride. So my husband, I at least looked like I was the blushing bride, but my husband grabbed me and kissed me. And then the crowd said, do it again. There were 400 people at our wedding. Said, do it again. So he did it again. And I mean, it was like the thing that was talked about for years. And in fact, I was telling Pam and Rabbi that my niece was at the airport about 3 years ago. And she met another Telugu family, and, you know, they got to talking, and the Telugu family goes, oh, are you the niece of so-and-so in Houston that kissed at their wedding in 1988? I mean, it's ridiculous. So anyways.
That's for sure. And I think that's why we're all related. I think for sure. I think, Pam, I'm sure you could probably tell comparable stories, but I really do want you to react to what VG has said, so we can really think about it and maybe get some directionality about how we approach all of these questions and dilemmas.
Oh, I have a lot to say, but I just loved, first of all, you know, VG, I just love that you are unpacking that, right? How that showed up for you and what that means. And you can reference to kind of that first point of feeling that there is something, right? I always tell people, if you don't want to name it right now, that's fine. But what happened that day was something, right? And we have an opportunity to get curious about, like, what is that, right? And I say that a lot because when you put language to it, people start to move into the mode of the need to kind of defend your goodness and your comfort when you start to unpack stuff like that. And so most of the time I'm like, well, what do you think that is? But to your point, one of the opportunities I think we have, especially in the book, is I'd love, a lot of times when we are trying to make sense of what seems like, in my opinion, just systematic dehumanization, which with whatever group that she named, right? She talked about she talked about several things. There's one of the things that really came full circle for me in this book is sometimes in the spirit of humanity, we will, in order to be able to make it palatable, we will try to compare situations, lived experience, right? And for a long time, that would really trouble me. I was like, why does that bother me? Let me get curious about why that bothers me. And I think it comes down to, when you go into this mode of like comparing these experiences, it becomes this examination of what's similar or not similar. And that might be helpful in some other ways. But when you're talking about deeply dehumanizing experiences, I think the opportunity that we have that this book brought out was there are correlations, right? There are things that we can say there's a relationship between these things. But what I loved about what she did is she didn't try to do this idea of comparison so that we could be comfortable in our ability to relate to each other.
Right.
She just let those experiences stand as they are. And so I think that's very powerful. And to, when I listen to Viji and talk just about the caste system, and I could definitely share in my experience, with different language, similar things. But I think we empower each other when we say, I am going to work to better understand what Viji just explained, to strengthen my own understanding about how we move forward in a way that's equitable, versus let's sit here and compare, because when you compare it, it becomes, mine was harder than yours was less hard than mine. And I think that really doesn't help us, move forward in community. So I think in the book, she did that very well. And I think the nuances of what Viji described are very unique to the Indian culture, and they should be able to stand as is without us standing in this space of feeling like, let me compare it, versus there is a correlation, and the correlation across all the examples in the book is systematic dehumanization, period. And
Right.
then allowing these individual experiences to stand on their own.
Right.
No, I appreciate that, Pam, and thank you for building on that. I do have, this isn't necessarily where I'm going to put it because I want to hear from you, but I do have a couple of criticisms regarding her treatment of sort of the caste system as it was in Nazi Germany. She kind of, it seems to be portrayed as sort of been there, done that, it's over. And I think to ignore the systemic issues of anti-Judaism, which became anti-Semitism, that have certainly been part of the structures of this issue and that have continued to this day. And it's interesting, and I would love to get your take on a thing that I'll ask you in a minute. When she starts talking about her connection to, as the statues have been removed in New Orleans with Mitch Landrieu, the mayor, who I've actually talked to specifically about that, as he was inspired by Wynton Marsalis, and certainly in Charlottesville as well in 2017. When I've traveled in Europe, I've had that privilege, and to see, just the everyday associations in the culture of people who are pillars in the systemic anti-Semitism or the anti-Judaism, both in politics and in the church in other ways. It's I would just, if she were here, I would ask her to sort of open that up a little bit. I'm sure she didn't think it's an open and shut case. I just want to be very mindful about not to compare, Pam, just to say what you're saying, but to recognize that past isn't even past yet. So I do.
I'm excited now. Y'all get some water. This is going to get good. So here's my take on what you just said. Of course, I've read it through a couple times. So at first I thought, oh, this sister got tired when we got to that part, because it was short. Let's be clear. It was a little short tinned. And then I got curious about, and just pure transparency, did that get shortened because for her, which is what I think we, really need to explore in ourselves, because when she was going to the pieces about, Jewish and all that, did she inadvertently decide, well, that's white. I'm gonna throw them in the bucket and keep it moving. I say that to her. I'm not with her tonight. I can't ask her. But I wonder about that. And so I just got curious about that. My first reaction as a Black female was, she's exhausted. She had to, like, she's exhausted. She has done such a deep dive, right? But to your point, I did not recognize that on the first read through. I did recognize it on the second read through. And if we had never done this, I was coming to talk to you about it to see if you interpreted that. And I was going to do it by asking you about the book generally and not lead the witness and see if you said it. So I want you to know that that's another reason why it's important to read more than once, because you miss out on the opportunity to maybe unearth some things that you didn't feel and see the first time through. What would it look like if we did not decide in this world to operate on the first read? A lot of what we experienced last year would not be occurring if we did not decide to draw our conclusion on a first read. So I feel you, and I felt it. And I when I get in that space, I always say to myself, what else could be true about this? Was she on a deadline? Like, I go into that space, but I did feel the snub.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Pam. And again, it's not to take away from her very important points. I just, as someone who navigates, that white world and the othered world and all of that, it's when we go to Charlottesville and hear, Jews will not replace us. And when we see the insurrection on the 6th of January of people, just casually connecting an anti-Jewish portfolio with their aspirations of retaining a sense of control and power and white supremacy, it's a really hard dance to be in, and it's hard to talk about because it gets so politicized so quickly. So I appreciate you raising that, and I know there's going to be hours and hours of conversation that we're going to continue to have. But let me ask you both, as you can. So what would you like to say? This is your platform. What would you like to say? Maybe Vijay, we'll start with you, or Pam, if you want to jump in. What would you like to say to the Jewish community about this book and the way that Wilkerson juxtaposes the three caste systems? Because I would agree with you. And Pam, you just said like the most Jewish thing ever, which is you have to turn it and turn it. You can't just be satisfied on the first reading. There's a tradition in our tradition that you have to study something 100 times, which gets you to the ground floor of conversation. So I hear you, but what would you want to say? There's a lot of friends here tonight, a lot of great people from across. And Sadia, I see you. It's so great to have you here. So awesome. I outed you too, by the way, and I saw that. But what, this is a Jewish convened thing. Vijay, what do you want to say to us? What do you want to say?
So first of all, I think just to Pam's point about reading something over and over again, I think that's like work that we can do for ourselves, like unpacking that's something that is like an ongoing thing. It's not like you just like, oh, I've done it once and you put it away and you're done. So I think, thinking and digging and always, I mean, you can apply that to a lot of, especially in this work, you can do, I think it's necessary. One of the things that I would say, I think it's really hard to dehumanize individual people. And it's, if you dehumanize a large group of people, I think that's exactly what the Nazis did. It's dehumanize the entire Jewish community, and that's the same thing that took place in the United States with African Americans, and the same thing with the with India and the Dalits. And so it's not to say that they're equal, but that dehumanization is what sticks out. When you dehumanize an other people, it kind of transcends. I mean, I don't know. It hurts me in my heart to even say that word dehumanize, but that's exactly what it is.
Thank you, Vijay. I appreciate it. Pam, I'll get out of your way.
I want you to know that that's the nicest thing you've ever said to me about being Jewish, because I'm calling Whit Bodman after this to tell him, because in my all faiths class, that was my favorite section. He's going to be really impressed that you said that. Okay. So what I would say is the commitment as a citizen to show up consciously around what you are experiencing and observing in communities where there is injustice, right, is an individualized sport. And so one of the things that I would say is, and you know, last year was probably one of the hardest years for my family. I felt I spent a whole year feeling significant fear. There were, you know, threats on me after just, you know, being in some articles. I was, you know, told right after the insurrection to not send my kids to school for a couple of days. There were some concerns about some things. My organization was under surveillance while we were doing racial reconciliation work. Juneteenth was under surveillance. So I spent a lot of time in fear last year. And so one of the things that I found to be finally, you know, something to articulate is I get that there is discomfort around talking about race because we've not been conditioned to talk about race. I don't know what happened in your households, but my mother used to almost give us a death threat glare to not bring up race, politics, or religion. We could be going to Target and she would give us the speech. Like, standard operating procedures do not talk about these three things. This is a US cultural norm, don't do it. And that did not serve us well. And I think in many households, that was what we were told and taught to do. And it has not served us well. So to the community, I would say, undo that. Mm-hmm. Ask the questions that scare you. Evaluate what your unconscious bias might be when you're in shared space with people that don't look like you. Get curious about why you're reacting the way you are, and give yourself permission to think about what you think and why. And I think if we all did that work, right, it would be powerful. I spent a lot of time, friends of all backgrounds, including friends that are Jewish. When George Floyd happened, I got a succulent and a lasagna dinner. Somebody sent me some flowers and some Tiff's treats. I am so sorry for your people, Pam. And I'm thinking to myself, appreciate that. I feel so shameful. Shame, blame, and guilt will not get us to the promised line. It's not getting us to the finish line. Yeah. Please cry your tear. Send me the succulent, because I love that, and the cookies. And then when the sun comes up the next day, I need you to be unrelenting in learning, listening, growing, and acting consistently, because my children in this house are depending on you to be on the front lines, calling people in on their discrimination and their racism, not calling out, calling in, and explaining how we will go further together. Mm-hmm. And really, I've never changed. I've been saying that since I've been in Austin. Like that, my message on that has never changed. And I spent my time really mad at white people for quite a few months last year. I did, because I was like, really? Like, read something, learn something. And then you got to get over that. You got to feel those feels, and then you got to get up and go, no, we have to go together. You know, the plight of Black people having to teach white people is a thing. I'm over that. I'll teach you all day long, but don't counter my lived experience with your theory and your comparison. I'll
Amen.
stay in the ring all day long with you. Mm-hmm.
Well, thank goodness for that. And I appreciate that. We have 100 times to study one thing, it looks like, you and I, Pam. So That's good. You know, I'm reading another book right now, and I know this is a book club. I don't want to get meta because we talk about other books in book club. That'd be crazy. But Gerald Horne, who's a historian, wrote a book called sorry, that's my life. Wrote Jazz and Justice, and it really is about the players or the musicians and the industry that they had to contend with. And it's essentially another book like Caste, and it's very, very painful to read. And he actually acknowledges, Gerald Horne is in Houston, and he actually acknowledged it. He said, "This was so painful to write. I'm going to give you the playlist that I listened to when I was writing it that helped me get out of that." And he said, "Here, just please listen to the same music I was, and we'll get through these pages together." And it's really hard about people who are striving, whether the mob, you know, folks, whether Italians or Jews or Irish or whatever, who are trying to be white, essentially. And it all boils down to, I think, Wilkerson's thesis about trying to be part of the power and trying to get some and push other people down so you get farther. Kind of like what VG was saying in terms of fair-skinned, et cetera, et cetera. But I wanted to, and we're going to just do another round or so, and then I'll have questions. So continue to think about your questions, and you know, I want to have more of a conversation in a few moments. But I'm so grateful to you, Pam and VG, for joining and opening your hearts and lives to us. And I just wanted to ask you a question now. Isabel Wilkerson made a name for herself with The Warmth of Other Suns, which won a Pulitzer Prize. It's the previous book to this one. It was her first book. Caste, of course, took off. Also just got a PEN Award yesterday that was announced. Let me ask you, VG, Pam, and whoever wants to show up first, what's the sequel to Caste? What's the next book, whether she writes it or somebody else? You know, The Warmth of Other Suns, which I haven't yet read, is about the Great Migration, which I know I will. I don't book shame me. I get it. I'm trying, right? But Jazz and Justice, that's where I'm going right now. But the idea of the Great Migration and, you know, Charles Blow just has a book that he just published, which his thesis is, you know what, there's got to be another migration from the North back to the South. There's a really interesting New York Times piece that he wrote about that a couple of weeks ago. So that's interesting. And then Caste seems to build on that kind of moving parts. What builds on this? What's next? What's the sequel to Caste in your opinion? Pam or VG?
VG, I was going to let you go because I've been talking. Go ahead.
I was going to let you go, but so you know, when you talk about sequel, is it like, so I wasn't, I mean, like, do you think, I mean, okay, the way I interpret sequel is what would be a good book to write after everything is fixed?
No, that's not what I mean. What's the next installment? Now we know, as Pam said, it's all in the same place. We all have it all in one book, all the nonsense, all the difficulty, all the struggle. Okay, got it. Check. What's the next installment? What's the next thing to know that might be written or should be written, that in your opinion?
Okay, this is going to sound a little feel goody or whatever, but I'm just going to put this out there. I keep thinking about the concept of Ubuntu. We talk about that at Trinity all the time, right? And that is, you know, I am because we are. It's a South African philosophy, and I kind of let me just think about this for just a second. But okay, I think that with that philosophy, I am because we are, and we are because I am. Each person is doing the work and understanding that they are a part of a greater whole, and it's larger than the individual, right? As Archbishop Desmond Tutu says, that people with Ubuntu are open and available to others, willing to be vulnerable, affirming of others, and they don't feel threatened when others are able to do good for, you know, because they have self-assurance. And so I would like to have a book about that kind of work, where people are doing the work that Pam is talking about, where people are talking about differences, where, you know, like, you know, parents are are not shushing their children when someone is different, but actually talking about differences and celebrating differences, and doing the personal work and not relying on their Black friend, but doing that personal work and being a true ally and not being performative, speaking up, even at the slightest hint of hate. And, you know, just, I don't know, I think that's an ideal kind of a situation, but that's what I would like to see. And I would love for that to be a sequel.
Awesome. Thanks,
If that
Fiji.
makes any sense.
No, of course it does. And it's very powerful. And I think it does help and helps us sort of, where do we go from here? As that was the theme, of course, of Dr. King's last book. And of course, the theme of what we presented about a month or so ago, about 3 weeks ago. And that you're giving us a really beautiful path. So thank you, VG. Pam, what do you think?
That sounds so much more kind than what I was going to say. Mine is breaking the chains of comfort. You'll be okay. And the reason why I say that is you have to behave your way and practice your way and build your muscle memory around discomfort. And I really try to consciously practice that. So I have literally done, Ramadan, and literally walked through what that was like. I meditated last year with Robin and with all Buddhists and me, all Buddhists and the Black girl. It was fascinating and uncomfortably beautiful.
Yeah.
Right? So what I would say is that we have to start breaking the chain of comfort. And the reason why it's so critical is because right now in this last year with this new awakening around like, oh my gosh, social justice, we got to do something. When I was growing up, my mom would say, you know what, it's just a finger in pudding. And what she meant was you put your finger in pudding and when you take it out, it congeals right back over the same way. And so when she really wanted us to get our act together and learn something and modify our behavior, and she would say, I love you too much to allow you to act like that. Keep your finger in the pudding. My mother meant stay uncomfortable. Because on the other side of that, right? And on the other side of the discomfort will grow something amazing. So to me, the sequel is we don't need any more data. We don't even need Black people gutting themselves, and being racially traumatized by continuing to talk about what we know to be true. Mm-hmm. What we now have to do is just literally break the chain of our comfort and do the work around how do we heal through this and then come out on the other side stronger.
Beautiful. I just want to ask you just a simple question, both of you. This was not one we thought about. And then we'll ask folks to kind of jump in. And Simone, not to put you on the spot or anything at all, but if you want to jump in after this question, and then we'll have a conversation about the book and about issues on the book and some of the really important surfacing that both Fiji and Pam brought. We could talk, by the way, it sounds like we have something called Jewish geography, by the way. We kind of people meet and they have to sort of get to know each other. Obviously, Fiji, there's some Indian geography going on, and Pam, I would assume that there's something very similar going on as well. So it would be nice to maybe we could talk all about that and realize we are all related. But let me ask you, not a sequel to Caste per se, this conversation about Caste itself came out of a conversation about larger messages from Dr. King that were raised. What books, you can put them in the chat, Pam or VG, what other books might be, what have been impactful to you that might be places where people can explore also? And you can either mention them or talk about it. I think that would be really helpful for many of us who are looking to be allies and looking to show up and looking to utilize the better angels of our nature and don't exactly have the way forward. And just, it's always good to connect that way. So I'll ask you if y'all, maybe VG or Pam or VG, what might you do a lot of teaching at Trinity, of course, about diversity and inclusion. Might there be a good kids book, or might there be a good book for young adults that you've come across that would be a good resource?
Jason Alexander and Ibram X. Kendi, I think wrote a book together. It's a young adult book. I think it's called Stamped. Is that right, Pam? Yeah. And so that's a good one. I think So you want to talk about race is a really good one for adults, and the audiobook is actually really good too. I think, I mean, there's so many. I think there's like, I think Howard Stevenson has several books out. I think that Pam said exactly the right thing, is to be uncomfortable, to be, put yourself in situations where you have to be uncomfortable. I mean, this is not easy. These conversations around race, it's not easy. And anyone who says it is, it's so surface level, and that's not where the real work is. And you know what? The other thing is that you're going to make mistakes. And that's where the learning grows too. I think when you make those mistakes or those missteps, think about the impact rather than the intention, right? And really see what the impact, how that is impacting somebody, and not make those excuses like, well, I didn't mean to do that. Because that the intention is invisible. The impact is a real thing for people. So I think that's a really, I love what you said, Pam. I think that is so important. And diversity, all this work, it is a growth mindset. We have to, you are never going to arrive, people. It's something that is ongoing work. I mean, it's just, I think anybody who thinks it's over, I think maybe it's, like you died. I mean, it ends with death, because I heard this today, the only thing that stays constant is that it's change. Right? And so we have to always be talking and learning and being uncomfortable and doing the work. And so, encourage your kids to, there's so many books out there. I have actually a whole list of books that I have in a folder that I keep for summer reading. So I can send those to you, Rabbi, if you want to share that with your folks later also. And I'm sure Pam has a lot too, but I would start with, both of those books are really good. The young adult book is good. And so you want to talk about race is really good, but I have a lot.
Well, great, VG. We'd love to get those lists and more partnership, of course, and more conversation. Pam, what you think?
I will send a list too. I would definitely tell you The Color of Law is something that you should read. If you're in Austin, by chapter 2, you're going to be like, oh, wow. If you haven't read Between the World and Me with Tanishi Coates, I would read that. Definitely give that some thought. And then what I would also say is, if you're in a situation, that's an excellent book. I have that too. Good Susan, good call. Love that one. The other thing I would say is that if you're in a situation where you're doing this work and somebody tells you that they are a diversity, equity, and inclusion expert, there's no such thing. I correct people all the time. I taught my first class in 1994 to the Bryan College Station Police Department. I've been going a long time. I am not an expert. Why? Because nothing's monolithic, right? I just took a 3-week class on pronouns at Stanford.
Oh my God.
3 weeks. Still trying to get it down, but I'm not giving up. Why? Because it's important. We're interdependent. If it's important to know it, I need to learn it. So that's, I was the oldest person in the class, by the way, let me add. Didn't matter. And so I would definitely say that to you, like, be suspect, like I would be curious, like suspicious of, like, I'm an expert on what? I'm not an expert on Black people, and I'm Black. So just, I encourage you to just hold space for that. The other book that I would say to you that has been a game changer for me that I did not expect is there's a book called The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker, I believe is the last name, biracial female, who has done some really interesting work around how do we define and give purpose to and context to how we gather. So when you start to do this work and you're like, let's do a book club or let's gather and talk about it, this book will become very helpful to you, because all that come are not coming purely to learn. Many are coming to prove and change and convince. And that is not the positioning that you need when doing this work. You need to come curious and turn to wonder and explore. And anything other than that becomes counterproductive to building the community that I think we all want. So I'll send a book list, but more importantly, pace yourselves, read it a couple times, get curious. Don't read, Good Racist, which is a good book, and be like, I got it down. No, you don't. I'm anti-racist. I'm sure you're not. It's a slow burn.
Mhm.
Thank you, Pam. I appreciate that. And anytime you're up for any Torah study, that's a good book to read too. I could do some of that. But no, I appreciate I appreciate those suggestions and certainly your time. We're going to have a good conversation. I hope that you both, VG and Pam, can stick around. And if there's questions to you or if you want to weigh in, of course, one of our great teachers and dear friends is Simone. And again, putting you on the spot, I apologize, but I know that this is an important conversation. And maybe you could take it from here. And if people have questions in the chat, or if you want to, if it works to unmute, and we'll do that, or if you know, it's something that you want somebody else to read. But Simone, the book or the conversation you've had, you've worked both with VG and Pam and with me over the years. What knowledge, what wisdom, what thoughts do you have this evening as we think about these difficult conversations and the slow burn of our lives? And VG, I don't know what was going on there, but it ends with death. It's like the most Jewish thing I've ever heard you say. I don't know. That's a lot going on. So God willing, we'll have lots of opportunities to share. But Simone, I'd love to hear from you, and then let's take it from there, everybody.
Well, I am so glad I'm here with you all this evening. Pam, VG, Rabbi, I mean, y'all are just wisdom people. And one thing that I kept thinking of when y'all were talking, and especially to the sequel, Rabbi, what you asked, is that, we've been having all these conversations around, and what has been striking to me is the awareness that people are having, and the awareness of, oh my gosh, the blinders are finally being removed. And it's like, oh yes, I was part of this confederacy. Oh yes, I was related to this person in the clan. Oh yes, I did grow up in a neighborhood like that. So it's just final reckoning that I have been part of this system, and I'm part of this system. And so it's just having those conversations where people can, I guess, face this and talk about it and see how we can move forward. That has just been one is astonishing to me, and at the same time too, I think in this space is uncomfortable for me, but it's just staying in this space, I think, is so important, and love and spirituality, because you can't be in this space without God's help, because I feel as though I'd go out of my mind, okay, because it's so painful. So again, I think having some discipline and having waking up, having some type of structure, some tradition, some rituals to help you sustain yourself through it. It's really critical, but it's lifelong work.
Thanks, Simone. And thank you so much for giving that structure and ritual to so many, with the ways and the welcoming spirit that you have for Interfaith Action of Central Texas, for sure. Really appreciate that's a jewel in our community. I know, Jennifer Rubin, you want to kind of frame book club itself, but after you do, Natalie, I'd love for you to hear your voice and speak a little bit of your truth, and then ask the question to all of us and to Pam, VG, as you desire, Natalie. So Jennifer, why don't you start, and then Natalie, take it from there, please.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rabbi, and thank you, VG and Pam, for everything that you have offered so far. This evening, as Rabbi Blumofe mentioned in the beginning, is a collaboration between our regular adult education book club, as well as Hazak, our organization for those of a certain age. And we do
Let's just name
have,
it. I'm learning from Pam, we're naming stuff 55 and above, the wisdom set. That's all I'm saying. Chazak, thank God for Chazak. Jennifer, you'll get there.
I will get there. Yes, God willing. So we do have a book club every month where we do get together to discuss different things that we've read, both fiction and nonfiction. We 2 months ago did read How to Be an Anti-Racist. And then last month we read a fictional account of Masada, which was beautiful. But I just want to let everybody know, since we have such a much larger audience tonight, that we do meet every month to discuss a book of our choosing. We have yet to determine what next month's read will be, but maybe we'll peruse the list that VG and Pam send over and maybe be able to choose something from there. But our next meeting is 1 month from tonight on March 11th. And if you have questions about that, you can visit our website or email me. Natalie, I will toss it over to you in a moment, because I do really like what you posted in the chat as well. And I'm curious to hear the answer to that question. And then after that, Robin Bradford also had a question. And if anybody has other questions, again, just post in the chat or message me. And if you have suggestions for books for our book club, please email them to me. I'll post my email address in the chat in just a moment. And again, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. And I look forward to the second half of the conversation.
Yeah, we're not done yet. We got the Zoom.
We're still not done yet.
Well, we got the Zoom
Natalie?
to like 11:30. We're good. So
Yeah.
See what happens. Natalie, what you got?
Just basically the question that I put in the chat, but I've heard of the Indian caste system and was aware of that. I did not realize until I read this book and hearing from you, VG, how real it is now. I literally had never thought of the Nazi regime as a caste system, but it was just like remarkable to hear her. There's a part where she has like the 8 different ways, or the 8 different characteristics of a caste system. And they just like applied them very meticulously to these 3 different systems. And it was just almost shocking to see how it was just so, it felt so real. Like, and then to see how it's applied to the racism in America. And I've just recently, like I said, I've been applying to so many things just ever since I read the book. Specifically, people like have talked about why people vote against their interests. Why do poor white people vote for, a billionaire who doesn't care about them? And this book was like, it exactly fits the caste system. And so it's just, I've been looking at things very differently since I read the book. And I wanted to hear how y'all, if it changed how you look at things, or you already saw the world that way. It was very new to me. That's my question. And if no one's going to jump in, I'll ask Pam to jump in.
I can jump in. I was listening to you. Yeah, the 8 pillars in the book. It's like every time you read another one, you're like, oh, that's so aligned. Like it was scary. And what I would say to you is, that's where I've had to really relinquish judgment in reading this book again. Not a lot of shocking stuff. I grew up in a household where my parents were like, okay, what did you learn in school today? Okay, let's pull out this other book. So I grew up in a household where I was constantly being educated, like the parts that weren't in the history book piece. And there was kind of the handbook, and then there was like the handbook, like to survive. So I always felt like I kind of knew the context of it, but the way in which she was able to weave the nuances through these kind of 3, different examples was, I thought, really beautifully done. And what I would say about your reference to kind of like, what's the disconnect between, people with a lack of resources that are white voting for a billionaire, like that lack of congruence. I think one of the things that's been really interesting for me is to get brave enough to inquire, right? And I've done a lot of that in the last year. Like, wait, what did you say? Can we talk about that? I want to better understand, because I really I got a lot of shocking conversations and emails and text messages from friends that were like, hey, we love you, but we would vote for Trump again. And I would go, I would like to talk about that more, as I'm explaining to you that I will not be traveling to Lufkin anymore to visit you because it's not safe. Like, those are the types of conversations I had to have last year and kind of remove ourselves from some of those relationships. And I would say that it becomes, again, this thing of conditioning, right? And exposure. What you've described is I've been conditioned to align so that I don't feel othered in ways that I already do. And this looks somewhat like me, so I'm going to align. And I know that, you know, we could go into all the reasons why that is, but I really do believe that's, you know, a huge part of it. And I've had to really work to try to listen to, are you willing to talk to me about why, right? So my kids, for all of December, only went left on our street because to the right of us, our neighbor put Trump and Christmas letters on their fence, and it made my children uncomfortable. So for the whole month of December, we only go left, we only go this way out of our neighborhood. And so I've been trying to get the nerve for the last couple of months, because, by the way, it's still up. Homeowners, where are you? I have a blade of grass that's off. You're on my door. This dude has a Cirque du Soleil laser light show on his fence. I've been trying to literally model what I preach, to knock on the door and say, maybe with some muffins or some Girl Scout cookies, hey, I'd like to learn more about why that's so important to you, right? And so it's hard. I haven't done it yet. We move in 3 days. My time's running out. I told my husband I might do it on the way out on the moving truck. But to your point, the book on tyranny, it's a little book. It's worth your time to read that sucker. It really brings into focus what you're talking about.
Thank you. I know Rabbi Lippy has her hand up, but I know Robin, you mentioned Jennifer has a question first. So why don't we go Robin and then Rabbi Lippy, please.
Yeah. First, Rabbi Blumofe, I've appreciated that you've offered your practice on Facebook in the mornings, and it's enriching to know that people are doing whatever spiritual practice they're called to do in the morning or whatever time of day they do it. It was very touching to me. As a Buddhist, where we're just sitting around doing nothing while you're praying. And you have a much better costume, I have to say. So the question, I haven't finished the book yet. I had to put it down to take care of myself. But the question, I flipped through it looking at things I underlined, which was a lot. And the question that I underlined that I think is one of the, it's not a question we can answer, and you were pointing towards it, Pam, in talking, but maybe BG, you might want to respond if it resonates with you. There's on page, and I don't have my glasses here, 183, who are you if there is no one to be better than? That quality of being, is that innate to being human? And, is there a percentage, a magic percentage of us who can do the spiritual and psychological and emotional work to not need to have the feeling of being better than in order to feel okay? Or what? Obviously that sentence just sort of, as many in this book, though I appreciated the framework so much, it was just so clarifying. It was just, thank you for calling this what it is, in a way that I never could have conceived of. Who are you if there was no one to be better than? I guess my question is just, is that a necessary part of being human? And maybe the rabbis are better suited to answer this question. I don't know.
VG, do you want to try? Do you want to take it? Thank you, Robin.
Rabbi Blumofe,
VG,
I think go ahead and you go ahead and try.
For me? Okay, I'll do that. Thank you so much. Appreciate it, Robin. And thank you, VG. You know, that's an incredible thought. And on that same page 183, Robin, I had highlighted the sentence, this idea of scarcity, right? Or perceived scarcity. As she writes, if a lower caste person goes up a rung, an upper caste person comes down. And here's the point for me, the elevation of others amounts to a demotion of oneself. Thus, equality feels like a demotion. And, you know, I hear you. And I think that is certainly something that navigating that. And that's why, you know, certain words are used of equality versus equity and understanding of you know, I have, and certainly among, you know, children that I have, that you know, if it's a hard navigation and a hard diplomacy to do that. And I think if somebody is entitled or feel that they're entitled to something that they've always had, to shift that, I think is really can really discombobulate or disrupt, hopefully positively, but that's not the feelings that initially come. And I was struck, just Robin, to think about your question, that Pam, who said that last year she spent several months being angry, as she said, at white people, and through that anger, through that frustration, still decided that she's doing the work. And I think that ultimately, once we recognize that that scarcity is not real, that construction of who we are and what we are just because somebody else gets ahead, I think that takes a lot of internal work. And I want to just rely on what Simone was saying of really having a practice of being honored by who we are and the ways that we do things. And I like your thought about Buddhists doing nothing. I think I don't think that's true, because the idea of having a rich inner life, I think, can protect against that kind of suspicion as well. So I think that's the beginning of an answer, and I think it deserves a longer conversation. It's tremendous food for thought. So I think that's important. Let's hold on to that. And Rabbi Lippi, I know that you have something, and I know Edwin, you've raised a couple of thoughts in the chat, which we can respond to. And Mike Apkowitz, I know you've raised a question. So let's go with Rabbi Lippi, and then Mike Apkowitz, and then we'll address Edwin's thoughts.
So,
Pam, do you want to say?
I just wanted to say hi to Rabbi.
Go ahead, Pam.
hi, I haven't seen you in so long, and I love your glasses. I wanted to say, a while back, I heard Gloria Steinem talking about a book tour she did, and she said, I mean, it sounds like a joke, but that at every city, people would say, but they're taking our jobs. And fill in whoever the they are. It could be anyone. It could be immigrants. It could be people of color. It could be women, whatever. And she said that her response was, who told you that those are your jobs? So my comment to Robin, and then to piggyback on this rabbi up here, is that I again, like Pam said, I'm not an expert, but I have worked with kids for a while. And I don't believe that better than is a nature thing. I think it's a nurture thing, because I have had to say enough times to kids, for whatever reason, this is how many bathrooms we have, or this is how many cookies we have. And you know what? When you trust them, they work it out. So I guess this really was originally an answer to Rabbi B's question about the sequel, that I'm really glad that there are a lot of Americans who are reading books about how to be anti-racist. That's great. And I'm really glad that a lot of Americans feel that their eyes are more open. Also, I would like to read the book about how did all of them, you, us, whatever you want to call it, get so entitled? And what can I say back? And like, Pam, I don't want you to go by yourself to your Trump neighbor's house. I will go with you, but I don't want you to knock on their door by yourself. And I have also been in some weird situations where I'm the one who has to say, do you really think that that's up to each couple? Or like little questions like that that I don't think are so effective. But I would love to read the book collaborated by all these authors that you're talking about, you know, not just Isabel Wilkerson, not just Gloria Steinem, but lots of people about, so when you're the one small person standing in the way, what are some good comebacks to address the rising tide comments?
Well,
No,
I
I
absolutely
I
love it.
appreciate that. And I'm sorry, Pam.
I was just gonna say, I love that. And that's the right headspace, right? Because after we get through all the reading, then what's the real life application, right? That's why people are like, oh, I'm anti-racist. I'm like, no, you're not, because when you're sitting at dinner with Great Aunt Gladys, you're gonna freeze, right? So you have to practice your way to that. You know, Robin is a dear friend of mine and sister, and I've watched her use her voice as a human shield in meetings many times for me, many times. And she'll get mad at me and write me after like, you didn't have to say that, but I am, because you've practiced your way to that. And I think one of the things is that we have to recognize that it's nuanced. It's like dying by 1,000 cuts. So it's stuff like, Pam, we want you to have a seat at the table. Let me stop you. That implies you own it. Stop, right? That you think that's empowering, that is not empowering, because that to me perceives that you own it, right? So it's those nuances, right? That you have to build muscle memory around. And I always say to people, look, you know, do you want to do this fast where it doesn't stick as part of the ethos of who you are? Or do you want to do it slow? So when people are like, I have just done 2 marches this week, read 4 books, and I've given to 3 Black organizations. And I will say to you straight up, slow down, right? So in the last 3 years, I've lost 119 pounds, slow and steady. I don't talk about it. I just do it. It's staying off because I've done it slow and steady. Had I done it fast, the weight would have come back on. The same thing to you and your pilgrimage to enlightenment. Slow it down. If you get exhausted and fatigued, you are of no use to us, right? You don't have to slay every dragon every day. You don't have to have a course correction. Just every once in a while, be like, did you really mean, could you talk more about that? Right? Because if you're in the space where y'all are right now reading, you figure out your comeback after the Zoom meeting is over, right? You're going to be there for a minute. So don't then beat yourself. I should have said something. You are not helpful to us if you stay in shame, blame, and guilt. When my friends start crying to me, I'm like, you're not going to be on the front line. Go meditate and come back. So I encourage you to issue self-compassion and kindness and slow burn, palatable, paced chunks of enlightenment.
Now, Pam, I'm imagining going to your next door neighbor's house and, you know, maybe to channel the experiences that Ms. Wilkerson put together in The Heart is the Last Frontier, that maybe it's the plumber, you know, and maybe there is a way forward, whether you're with Rabbi Lippi or somebody else, or I don't know, that, you know, maybe there's a special treat that you're, whether it's muffins or a nice pie or something, that there is a humanity if and that's a hard place to be, and that courage to be able to do it. So Rabbi Lippi, I appreciate your willingness to walk, and maybe we'll come back to it. So Mike, I know, and I appreciate these ways of pacing ourselves, because certainly, you know, we all want to do it right now. Instant gratification and instant sense of, we see the problem been 400 years plus in this country, and we want to knock it out by the end of the Zoom call. So hopefully we'll get it done. But lots to do. Mike Apkowitz, what do you have to say?
Well, I've been reading the book, and it's been very enlightening, and lots of history in detail that is scaring the daylights out of me. But I keep thinking about it from a modern Jewish perspective here in Austin, and thinking about our Jewish history, our teachings, our community institutions, and the privilege we have, and you know how that relates to the racism and the outside community and, our own quote unquote chosenness. And by being quote unquote the chosen people, are we not ourselves guilty? And how do we reconcile this?
Mike, I think it's a great question, and I think it relates a little bit to what Edwin was suggesting as well when he asked a little bit ago about the letter that George Washington wrote to the Truro Synagogue when he's talking about the Jewish race. And my opinion, again, like we can talk about this for a long, long time. My opinion is that it's a continuum, and hopefully there's a sense of love and respect for each of us and all of us as we consider ourselves. I really was taken by what Robin suggested that she was reading and had to put the book down for self-care. To me, that's a form of chosenness, and it's not a form, and I think it was actually related to her question, it's not a form of chosenness at the expense of who you are. It's a sense that my life actually matters. It's a sense of actually taking seriously, whether it's Reb Nachman or somebody else who taught that we always have in our pockets one note that says, I am but dust and ashes. And in the other pocket, for me and for my sake, the world was created. Because we can very easily beat ourselves up and be our worst enemy. And at the same time, we can certainly, if we're not careful, allow our own needs to overshadow anybody else's. So to me, chosenness means that to me, it's another way of saying, and this is what I teach kids and interfaith work, because when I teach at the seminary otherwise, people are like, hey, what's this chosen people stuff? To me, it's about saying, Hineni, here I am, and my life matters, and what I do matters. And it does matter, as Pam was suggesting, that once a month or once a week, I say, could you clarify for me, or can we have a bigger conversation about X, Y, or Z? So to me, it's not an outward facing thing. It's a way of saying, I take myself seriously. And the way that I would link that to Edwin's comment is that I think this is all a continuum, certainly in this book, but certainly much more in other books like Gerald Horne's. You can see that people are battling for a place in the power structure, especially immigrants or people. I had this whole thing prepared, Pam, as I told you, in VG on my other computer about the so-called Immigration Act of 1924, which we're thankfully not getting into tonight. But that was a death knell for many Jewish people in Europe. Many people couldn't leave and couldn't come to this country. So the fact that President Washington would call the Jewish people a race, or call us Hebrews, or whatever, there's words, certainly in the African-American community too, there's been words in and out of fashion. So the idea is that I think we're all trying to do the best we can, and we have to deal with the world as at large. But Mike, to me, the universal message of chosenness among Jews is not chosenness at the expense of, but chosenness that in the day and time that I have, there is no kingdom of heaven like there is in Christianity. All we have is this world. So I choose to stand up, and I choose to do the work that I need to do. I choose to do the mitzvot. I choose to have that spiritual practice publicly. And yes, I choose to do the tikkun olam work, the repairing of the world work inside, internally, and outside. That's how I read it. So I appreciate that question, and hopefully, Edwin, we got to you as well. We just have a few more minutes, and so I think.
Wait, hold on a second. You always do that. That was pure anointed brilliance that just came out of your mouth.
No,
you notice how he skips over it?
I am but dust and ashes, Pam. I am but dust and ashes.
That was so good. I'm gonna have to think on that over some tea tonight. That whole last piece, are we recording? That
Yep.
whole last piece, I'm sure he talks to y'all about like this all the time. I'm not around him as much. So when I get it, I have to stop and recognize the gift. We were on the last year, the interfaith thing. It was me, Rabbi Neil, James, Simone. We didn't hear any of the program because he talks like that all the time. And we were having an entirely different service in that day in the stands. But I'm going to stop and say, because you always go on after you do this, what a gift to fill my cup tonight. Because I'm tired. I'm racially traumatized. I did 2 of these yesterday. I did 11 last week. I did 7 the week before. What a gift to be able to get my cup, my love cup filled by your words and command of humanity. Okay, I'll let you have it back.
Thanks, Pam. Thank you very much. I appreciate that very much. We will go for another 5 or so minutes if we don't mind. And maybe, I know Steve had something he wanted to share, and then Sadia, why don't we end with you? Is that okay? So, and I know, appreciate that. So let's, Steve Gerson, why don't you take it and then see what we can do, and then Sadia, and then we'll say thank you. And Jennifer, you get the last word. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, my thought was, I guess, as reading this and had read book reviews of this book before I got into it, of exploring the 3 cultures, and then I've gotten into it, and it just feels like, and you and I, Rabbi, have talked about sapiens before and just human development, and how really universal casteism feels to me, that ever since some groups of people started exploiting other groups of people, there's a rigid structure on how people are going to act together. So I don't know if that's what she does in this book is brilliant to really provide the detail of how, you know, the Nazis are just incredulous that how can the U.S. have such good public relations on they're the land of the free, and look at all their laws. That was just incredible that that she brought up that history. But and just one last observation, you can say whatever bad things you want about Donald Trump, but it was never this cold when he was president. So.
That's fantastic, Steve. Coming from you specifically, that's hilarious. So thanks. Does VG or Pam, do you want to respond at all to Steve's really wise observations, except for the last one that he did?
I agree with Steve, and you know, this book was it was very interesting, because when the title of the book first came out, I would never have put these 3 things together at all. And when it first came out, it was kind of like a light bulb went off. Like, ooh, okay, that's interesting. And then when you really dig into those 8 pillars and see the similarities of some 3 really huge dehumanizing movements, it was you know, it was so powerful, and I think it's going to take a lot of unpacking. I mean, it's just going to take a lot of peeling back and reading over and over again, as Pam said. Yeah, it's I think my mind is totally blown, because I would never have put these 3 things together. I mean, look at these 3 systems in the same way before.
Thanks, Fiji. And thank you, Pixie. I know that there's a section in the book where she talks about the dogs in her house, and that caste system. It's so that absolutely, Pixie. Thanks for raising that. Sadia, it's so beautiful to see you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me. So my question was not related to the book, but it really, I've been actually at a Red Bench event at IACT for when we were in person, and I was mentioning to my table guests that I'm often the only either South Asian in the room or Muslim in the room. And I use that as a way to get my views out there. And the person who happened to be African-American said, well, don't you feel like that's tokenism? And my thought was, maybe it is, but I'll take what I can get. So I wanted to hear from Pam and VG if you guys feel tokenized and how you feel about that.
I'm usually the only person of color at the table in my school, and it may be tokenism, but I use it, you know, I use my voice. I don't let people shut my voice down, right? So it may be tokenism. I don't feel that way, and I certainly don't act that way. I'm not the victim there.
What I would say is, yeah, And I have been conscious of that since I've been serving on nonprofit boards since I moved back to Austin. And I make this joke all the time. And some of y'all know Mondo Rayo, but back in the day, there was like 6 of us total. Oh, he's on here. Hey, Mondo. There's like 6 of us total. And it was like, okay, there's 6 of us. Let's deploy to these 6. Like we would like
strategic
deployment. Like there's 6, we got to spread out, right? And so the answer to that is yes, I absolutely am always battling. I've talked to Nicole Bell about this. I'm always battling between I consciously know I'm being tokenized, but I need to be a voice at that table so that organization does not do that mess again. So I weigh the costs. And then there are other times when I sit in psychological safety and go, I won't be able to come to that without, really being able, without a cost to myself that I'm not willing to give up. And so I don't. So I've navigated that way. And so as somebody that leads a BIPOC team of females, all female, identify as female, what's been interesting for me, Sadia, based on that, what you're saying is that they've been calling me to question on how often I get neutral, play the game. Why, man, let's burn it down. I mean, the younger generation is coming out with a different construct around what they will and will not tolerate. And every person on that team is ready to knock something down, especially when I was getting a lot of threats and people, a woman wrote to me and said, go back to Africa, I'll buy your ticket. Like they were on fire all last year. Like, are you going to take that? And so it's been really interesting to even with my daughter, like that dynamic. And so what I say to them often is, I'm sitting in this spot knowing that I will not reap the benefit from this, but you might. So, hold my tea, watch me work. Right. So I'm constantly having to navigate that, certainly.
And I think the other thing is that when we do things like that, I think, Pam, I'm not going to speak for you, but I think we have to, part of this work is also taking care of ourselves and a lot of self-care. Because we give and give and give, and, it is traumatic at times. And so I think that's just as important work in social justice and all this is self-care. And I think that's hugely important.
And one more thing, let's be honest, that in those situations, so I worked at Trinity. I was an interim for the advancement office, right? I was there 3 days and I instituted what I call FAM, find a minority. First person I found, VG. That was about like not many. So there's that piece too, where you have to find kind of your safe space to like shut your door and cry because it's heavy. And I think when we don't name that, people don't realize it. Do we look put together? Sure we do, but I won't speak another word after this until like tomorrow at 3. Right? Like that's real.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. And I just want to end with a note of solidarity. As Wilkerson makes a point in her book, that before there was racism in this country, there was religious discrimination. And I do similar ideas. One of the reasons I joyfully stay in Austin to serve my wonderful community is to be able to have these kinds of conversations, which are important. And I like being a convener of that. Very often I'll sit on a committee as the Jewish person or the Jewish voice. And is it tokenism or not? Whatever. But it's really important that it's interesting. I'm on a particular committee that it's a very diverse group depending on how you look at it, but there's only one Jewish guy and it's a very interesting thing. And very often people will find common ground because they're dancing over these very difficult issues of identity that we've been talking about all night. Mm-hmm. And they'll find, Simone, they'll find their commonality in Jesus. Mm-hmm. I'm like, that's cool. That's hold up a second. And they're like, oh man, what do we, and then we got to take it back. So, and that's, I would agree. There's a real sense of deliberation with all of that too. So I would agree. And I like Nicole, which you wrote as well. Judaism, of course, has something very similar. There's just lots of different versions about it, but they find somebody planting a tree, an old man planting a tree, a carob tree perhaps, and somebody comes up and says, dude, that tree's not going to have fruit on it for 70 years. Like, what are you doing? You're an old man, you know, what? And he's like, this fruit isn't for me. The fruit is for the next generation. The fruit is for those who are coming after me. And if these trees aren't planted, what are they going to eat? And that slow burn, I think, is really important. So really appreciate this beautiful conversation. And VG and Pam, I'm indebted to you and appreciate our friendship, our deep friendship. And may we continue to thrive, and God willing, with good health. All of us, may we be blessed with continued inspiration and joy. And Jennifer, if you can close this up, I'd appreciate it. And thank you so much to Brooke Hirsch-Thompson and to Mariessa Anton, who I know couldn't be here because she's battling the electricity issues, but to Rowena and Steve Chodorow, representing, of course, Chazak, as well as the CAA Adult Education. Watch this space, y'all, and appreciate it. And Jennifer, take us home. So we'll see each other soon again, God willing, with good things.